Good morning, Denise Dryden. I'm out here on Bainbridge Island, Lytle Beach. I like this. It's this little inlet that goes between Bainbridge and Bremerton. So you see the ferry coming in behind me. It's kind of cool. It's quiet. There's eagles up in the tree. And I wanted to talk to you today about a topic that I'm starting to put together and in a much larger extent than I did the first time. On January 14th, we talked about subjugation. And subjugation is sort of what happens when we power over. As a sort of global community or global national community issue is what happens when we power over people. So today what I want to do is bring that right straight into the family system, into us as parents. And talk about what does that really mean when we subjugate as parents. So subjugate is a Latin term, and it means to be brought under the yoke, which means how do you put something on or do something to a being that makes it stop acting out, makes it much easier to manage, and you can direct it where you need it to go. And so in the case of the Latin term, it's when you put a heavy piece of wood around an oxen's neck and it does what it's supposed to do, and it's very predictable. So it's to power over, it's to break the will of control, manage, suppress. And I'd be the first person to say that there are so many times when you're a parent where it's so much easier just to go like, rah, stop. I need everything to stop right now. Whether I'm in overwhelm, or whether it's just too many kids, too little time, or I just didn't have any other understandings of what that was about. And so this sort of happens in every culture, in every part of the world, when we use subjugation as a tool for leadership. And leadership is the most essential place in the family system as far as I'm concerned. So globally, we have this hierarchical system. It's patriarchal based right now for the last 2,000 years. For tens and thousands of years, we have used subjugation as a way to manage the masses, which is we're going to establish a hierarchy system, and whether it's a pope or a king, or in our corporate world now, teachers, institutions, presidents, anything that has sort of a top-down management is going to use subjugation, which is I'm going to lead you and you need to follow what I need you to do. And if you do it really well, then we live happily. If you don't do it very well, then we don't live happily, right? So subjugation is about this sort of system that institutions have lined up forever. And it's the real world, right? We need to prepare our children to get out there into that system where they need to learn how to play by the rules. They need to understand how to navigate. And, I'm here to cry bullshit on that. We are in a place of trying to create a new future for ourselves, and it has to start with our children. And in order for us to have a future that's free, a future that is independent, a future that is creative, it makes sense to me that we want to continue to create a world that is honored and safe to be who we are. So we want to step away from subjugation. And I also understand that the role of the parent is to teach and prepare these systems, but to do it in balance, this is what the system is. I'm not saying totally refuse it. I'm saying how do you move around in it without being controlled by it? And I think that that's what our role as parents is to do. So when we use things like discipline, punishment, whether it's spanking, which, or picking up and moving, or yelling and screaming, or taking something away from someone because we don't like their behavior. It depends on how we do that, right? It's also what happens when we already have an intrinsic form of power as a parent, because we're so much bigger than our children in size, in volume. And when we yell or when we put something out there, we have to realize that we're already powering over a child. And then there's this other piece of abandonment, which is, if I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to separate myself or separate you and put you over there. Time out, silent treatment. These are all sort of forms of the way that we take power, and we try to do it as a parent the way we want to, but sometimes it just backfires and it doesn't work. We impose, we impress upon, we press upon, we manipulate, we manage our children, and when we do that, they feel managed. They feel controlled. They feel like they have to suppress who they are, especially if when their will, when their power is coming up within them, and they have something that they want to do, something that they want to see, something that they want to become, and it doesn't work within our time frame, or it doesn't work within the spectrum of our house. Whether it's we believe in obedience and we believe in the mother and father as being right at all times, or we believe in that school is the most important and whatever the teacher says. You know, there's all these systems of where we put the power into the adult, and we suppress all of these emotions, these wishes, these needs, these things that our children have. Then we have to really take a serious look at how do we change that as parents. So when we oppress, when we put a yoke on, when we subjugate our children, we create outer-driven children. We create children who look around the world and measure who they are based on what the world does around them, not internally, externally. They're suppressing their needs, and they are looking for forms of punishment and control, and it's based on us out there, right? And they're dependent. We end up having 18-year-olds that are completely dependent on us because they only know how to push off and on us as the system. We also suppress their feelings, which is if they can't tell us how they really feel, even when they're angry or they're stuck, especially when they're toddlers and they don't have the words to tell us what they need. And especially if they're highly sensitive, where they're overwhelmed and they can't even explain what that is because they don't know what it feels like, and there's no context of I'm overwhelmed, or it's too stimulating in this area, or the lights are too bright. And we're like, no, they're not. Don't worry about that. I don't get it. And we just keep suppressing them. They push their feelings down. And for those of you who've been watching this, you know that I work a lot with families who have kids in therapeutic programs. And I thought this was a really interesting list. I was checking some things out on Google. And when a child's purpose, wants, or needs are not met or seen by the parent, we can see some of the following behaviors. An accumulation of anger, sort of anger buried deep down inside, passivity, avoidance, passive-aggressive behaviors, uncontrolled outbursts of anger, somatic symptoms like stomach aches, headaches, I don't want to do this. They just don't, they just disintegrate physically and fall apart. They distrust the world. They act out. They're defiant. They're the key oppositional defiant rebel, the one who would say, no, not doing that, or push it down and say, okay, I'll do that, and then have no way to express that out in another place. Substance abuse and self-medicating. So these are all things that what happens when those feelings are suppressed, because it isn't safe to be who we are in a house with parents who are doing the very best they can. They just don't know how to slow down and listen and ask and co-create with the child. What we do is we go to our easiest form of parenting, which is, okay, everybody sit right there right now. Everybody stop talking. Everybody go to bed at this time. Everybody eat this, because it's so much easier, especially when you have 3 or more kids, right? 2, 1. The kids feel bullied. They feel harassed. They feel controlled. And I think most importantly, they feel powerless. Absolutely powerless. And this is concerning because they're unable to take ownership for their lives. They end up being 18-year-olds underdeveloped sense of self, sense of maturity, sense of responsibility. They're, like I said, immature. They're outer-driven, not inner-driven. They lack confidence. They lack independence. They don't know how to make their decisions separate from what the money or mom and dad or what the expectations are of them. They just don't know what to do. All they know how to do is be dependent on you as parents. And then you've got this 18, 19, 21, 22-year-old that's completely dependent on you because they haven't individuated. They don't have courage to make changes. They might want to make changes, and then they get really angry at you because they can't make the changes that they want because they don't have the freedom and they don't know how to do it, and it's all your fault. So it's, again, push on the parents, push on the parents. And when they don't know what they want or feel, then they're trapped. And we've created that because we haven't been able to give them some opportunities when they were younger, or, as they're growing up, to feel like they had more power. And I think that this is a really, really difficult role to play, because as parents, we're guardians, we're teachers, we're mentors, and yet we also have this, responsibility to teach the system out there. And if we get too caught up in the system out there, then we subjugate. And if we forget about that and we create these free, wild beings, then they don't fit into the world very well. So as parents, we have to figure out how to navigate through that, right? It's kind of a difficult job. So when we have kids and when we want to start dealing with how we power over, or are we putting a yoke on our kids' necks, we model how we take care of ourselves. We have to model what we know we want and need and how we take care of that. We have to model our feelings, right? How we feel. I'm feeling really tired right now, so for the next hour we're going to have quiet time in the house because I need quiet time. You guys can do whatever you need to do, but it's just going to need to be quiet. And so we guide it and we model it. And so the term that keeps coming up with subjugation is not to power over, but to power within, side by side. How do I make sure that my kiddo is strong on the inside? And then we develop some discovery together, some exploration into what this world is as people. How are we going to go to school when you don't like it? What are some ways around this? And we end up meeting them on their level and helping empower them. So words that came up was that we collaborate with our children. We get down on their level and we sit with them and we look in their eyes and we say, what is really going on, and how can I support you with that? And then we provide really healthy boundaries of things like choices. Well, I understand that you're still really little, and sugar's going to be really bad for you. You don't have to say that, but so here's some choices. You can have water, or you can have milk, or you could have juice, right? But soda's not going to happen. And you just keep telling them what you need them to do, and you give them some choices. And when they make a choice, you go, great choice. And you empower them, right? You explore. Well, what are some other things that you can do? What are some other ways of doing this? You ask questions. What? If you could do anything, what would that be? And you try to get outside the box, get outside the box, get outside the box. You give your children and yourself time. We keep talking about time, wide open spaces, how to use space and time in parenting. It's like our most valuable tool, and it's the one that we give up the first when we're busy and when we're overscheduled. Flexible. How do we become flexible and growth-oriented, which is, how is this going to turn into an 18-year-old later, and how am I going to get there? How am I going to get this child at 10 to 18 where they're empowered and they're self-confident and they're creative and they're fun and they trust life? How do I do that? That's my role, right? I have to create that. Out of respect. We respect, things, whether it's the earth and recycling, each other, relationships, property. It doesn't, whatever it is, it's like, how do we teach that without saying, you have to respect me first as a parent, which is top down. How do you become a collaborative person who earns respect and shows respect? I talked about being in discovery and problem solving. How do you become a problem solving unit, a team? My favorite thing to do was to take my kids camping during the summer and go out for 10, 14 days. And we all just problem solved. Well, what do we need to do first? And then what would we do in this spot? And if we needed to hang clothes up to dry, where would we put them? And where would the hammock go? And who wants to go find wood? Because we need that really dry little stuff that starts fires first. What is that stuff? And we would just become problem solving supporters. And when they find it, you're like, wow, it's great. You did a great job. So we empower. Because remember, what we want is a world of people who are intelligent, who are confident, creative. They have their third chakra, their will is intact. You don't have to go back in therapy for 20 years and figure out how to redevelop their will. They're problem solvers, they're individuals, and they're responsible, and they're empowered. So how do we create that as parents? I think it always begins with us. So this is the magnificent role we get to play as parents. And when we subjugate, and when we put a yoke on, and when we try to control, it doesn't work. So if you'd love some tools about what that might look like and how you can step out of that yourself, give me a call. I love to work with adults who parent. It's my favorite topic, of course. We talk about it a lot here. You can find me on DeniseDrydenCoaching.com and have a magnificent day. I know I will. Take care.